In the heart of the Indian Ocean, there is an island whose landscape seems woven from fairy tales. Madagascar is a world of endless forests, high mountains, and starry skies, where ancient spirits still whisper their songs. But one day, darkness fell over this paradise. A woman whose name they still dare not speak aloud seized power in the land. Ranavaluna, a queen who turned the lives of millions into a never-ending nightmare. She was born under the name of Ramavu, an ordinary girl from a simple family. Her father became famous when he saved the great king Ranavaluna from a conspiracy. For this, the king rewarded him handsomely. Ramavu was accepted at court and married to the king's son, Radama. But this marriage was the beginning not of love, but of hatred. Radama kept 12 wives with him and despised Ramavu. Worse still, he had executed several of her relatives. A thirst for revenge flared up in the young woman's soul. Radama was a progressive monarch. He expanded the influence of his kingdom, opened the country to foreigners, allowed Christian missionaries, and established ties with the British Empire. But these changes were disliked by many traditionalists, including Ramavu. She was patient, waiting for her time, and she did. In 1828, the king died unexpectedly. Under very suspicious circumstances, the throne should have rightfully passed to the king's nephew, Rakotoba, but Ramavu acted with lightning speed. Before news of Radama's death had spread, she gathered troops from her hometown, seized the palace in Antananarivo, and declared herself queen. Those who supported the rightful heir were offered a choice: recognize the new queen, or die. Within hours, the opposition was swept away. Rakotobe and his family were annihilated. Many nobles fled or were executed. On the throne now sat a woman who came from the common people. But what happened next made everyone wish they had died in those first days. On becoming queen, Ranavaluna quickly showed that there was no room for mercy in her heart. She despised foreigners and all their ideas. For her, sovereignty meant complete isolation and the preservation of ancient customs, even at the cost of millions of lives. In 1835, she fell seriously ill, but recovered. The queen attributed her miraculous outcome not to doctors, but to magical talismans, sampi. Believing in their power, she ordered the expulsion of Christianity from the island. A decree was issued: death for professing the Christian faith. A bloody persecution began. Christians were caught all over the country. Those who refused to renounce their faith were subjected to terrible torture. People were thrown off cliffs, their bodies smashed against the rocks below. Others were boiled alive. Some were crucified. The queen is said to have found it particularly ironic to crucify Christians as if they were their savior. In 1836, 14 Christians were executed in one day. The missionaries were forced to flee, leaving their converts behind. Ranavaluna taunted, "You see how your gods are powerless. Your teachers are fleeing like rats." But her most horrible weapon of terror was the Tangana ritual. Those suspected of treason or sorcery were forced to drink a decoction of the poisonous Tangana nut. 3 pieces of chicken skin were added to the drink. If a man spewed all 3, he was considered innocent. If any of them remained, he died a painful death. Every year, from 5 to 10,000 people died in this way. Even the dead were not left alone. The corpses were also subjected to the Tangana ritual. Of course, they could not burp the pieces, and this gave the authorities the right to take all their property in favor of the queen. The preparation of the poison was accompanied by ancient chants. Priests in black robes would grind nuts until only an ominous rustling could be heard all around. Victims were starved for 24 hours before the ritual. Executions were carried out in public as an example to others. The queen's cruelty knew no bounds. In 1849, French troops attempted to land on the island. Ranavaluna's army not only repelled the attack, but also captured 21 European soldiers. Their heads were placed on stakes along the coast. A frightening message: you don't belong here. Meanwhile, a real nightmare was going on inside the country. Taxes were replaced by hard labor. Men and women were sent to work on endless projects. Many died of starvation or disease far from home. Some never returned. One of the worst projects was building a summer palace in the mountains. The stone blocks were pulled by thousands of workers. No tools, no rest. In 2 years, nearly 10,000 people died. When the queen heard of the casualties, she supposedly said, "Stone and lime hold better when mixed with blood." Slaves were sold abroad. Even their own subjects were used. Men were sent to plantations, women and children to the slave markets of the East. The conditions of transportation were so terrible that many died on the way. As Ranavaluna grew older, she became more and more suspicious. The slightest hint of displeasure could cost a life. A bad dream told to a courtier could lead to mass executions. Tripped in front of the queen, death sentence. Looked too long into her eyes, death. She seriously believed the clouds in the sky could be a spell cast against her. A spy network monitored the skies, and people were obliged to report anything unusual. Several dozen people were executed for collaborating with cloud sorcerers. The queen banned the color purple. All clothing, feathers, and flowers of that hue were publicly burned. Even an accidentally found petal of a purple flower could lead to arrest. For all her hatred of foreign religions and politicians, Ranavaluna had a strange admiration for French culture. She kept a broken piano in her palace and made her courtiers dress up in French dresses and frocks. She became obsessed with soap. She learned the recipe from missionaries. She banished Christians, but ordered bathhouses to be built throughout the capital. A few Europeans remained at her court, mostly craftsmen. One of them was Jean Labarre, a French engineer who was shipwrecked off the island. Instead of executing him, Ranavaluna made him her advisor. Under his leadership, arms and textile factories were built on the island. By refusing to trade with Europe, the queen dealt a devastating blow to the country's economy. To make up for the loss, she stepped up the slave trade. Not only captured enemies, but also her own people were sent to the slave markets. Many families were torn apart forever. Men were sold to plantations, women and children to Arab countries. The conditions of transportation were horrendous. Many died of asphyxiation while still in the holds. Ranavaluna had an only son, Prince Rakoto. Unlike his mother, he received a European education, knew French, and sympathized with the ideas of humanism. The prince was beloved by the people. He often intervened to save the condemned, tried to cancel the rituals of Tangana. But his gentleness angered the queen. She considered him weak. To raise a man, she forced her son to attend executions. If he turned away, she publicly ridiculed him. Nevertheless, Rakoto continued to secretly help the prisoners and dreamed of changing the country's politics. In 1855, Joseph-François Lambert, a French businessman, arrived on the island. He befriended Jean Labarre and Prince Rakoto. Together they drew up the so-called Lambert Charter, a document that granted Lambert the right to exploit local resources in exchange for helping to overthrow Ranavaluna. This document later became the pretext for French colonization. In 1857, Lambert returned to the island, hoping to raise a rebellion, but the plot was discovered. Ranavaluna immediately ordered the expulsion, or execution, of all foreigners. Lambert and his closest allies miraculously escaped to the island of Mauritius. The failed plot only increased the queen's paranoia. She was convinced that Christians and foreigners were plotting against her. A new wave of bloody repression began. Whistleblowers were rewarded. The persecution of Christians broke out with renewed vigor. The executions became more and more brutal. But the queen did not kill her son. Perhaps it was maternal instinct. Perhaps fear of losing her only heir. Instead, she kept him under constant guard in the palace. In the last years of her life, Ranavaluna went completely mad. Servants were executed for the slightest offense. Dropped a tray and you went over a cliff. A wrong look, death. A bad courtier could be buried alive in the ground. The queen used to feast during executions. It's said she was interested to see how long the victim could endure the pain. She even invented death races. The condemned were forced to run across the field while soldiers with spears chased them. If you made it to the line, you lived. If you don't make it, goodbye. The courtiers lived in constant fear. Some slept with a sack of earth under their pillow, so that if summoned, they could swallow it and die quickly. Others hid poison in their rings. The queen developed an obsession with death. At one point, she ordered a rhinoceros hunt, even though there were none in Madagascar. When she was told of this, she had the messengers executed and still sent hundreds of men in search of the non-existent beast. Many died in the fruitless wanderings. At one point, she ordered the corpses dug out of their graves and tied to poles to make them work. The stench poisoned entire villages. In August 1861, Ranavaluna finally died. She was 73 years old. The morning of her death brought a strange silence to Antananarivo. People were afraid to rejoice. What if it was a trap? But when it became clear that the queen was indeed dead, a quiet jubilation began in the streets. It is said that before she died, Ranavaluna shouted, "Demons are coming for me with chains of fire. Thousands of souls are calling for me." Her last words were spoken in terror, and her face was frozen in a mask of fear. The funeral was lavish, not out of respect, but out of fear. The priests performed special rites to keep her spirit in the grave. Amulets were placed in the tomb, not to protect her body, but to catch her soul. After Ranavaluna's death, her only son, Prince Rakoto, was finally able to escape from palace captivity. Under the name of Radam II, he took the throne. The people greeted his reign with hope. Everyone remembered that he had been merciful, that he had saved people from execution, that he had dreamed of a different destiny for the country. The first thing the new king did was to abolish the Tangana ritual. The terrible poison was no longer to shed the blood of innocents. He reopened the country to foreign traders, lifted bans on Christianity, and granted religious freedom. Peace and hope seemed to be returning to Madagascar. But not everything was so simple. Ranavaluna's years of terror were not without consequence. Her brutal policies became ingrained in the culture of the country, like a poisonous root. The court retained noble families who enjoyed cruelty. Much of what brought Ranavaluna power made her legacy all too enduring. Radama II's reforms were met with resistance. Conservatives at court felt that the king was betraying his mother's precepts, ruining tradition. Their anger grew. 18 months after his accession to the throne, Radama II was overthrown in a conspiracy and strangled. His body was hidden. His mother left him no peace, even after her death. What did Ranavaluna leave behind? During the 33 years of her rule, Madagascar's population was almost halved, according to various estimates. Entire villages disappeared from the face of the earth. Crafts, trade, education, all were destroyed. Instead of a prosperous power, the country became a reign of terror. It weakened the economy. Instead of legitimate trade, the slave trade. Instead of development, isolation. Instead of new generations, graveyards. It turned ancient traditions into instruments of terror. Rituals that were once rare have now become massive instruments of execution. The distrust of foreigners, the fear of change, was deeply ingrained. It took decades for the country to at least partially overcome this paralyzing terror, but even in its isolationism, some later saw a strange form of early nationalism. It was her defiance and fierce determination that kept European colonizers out of the country during her lifetime. It took the French a long time to penetrate the island, but it was all in vain. A weakened Madagascar eventually became easy prey. In 1896, decades after the Queen's death, France did take the island. What Ranavaluna had feared so fiercely, and for which she had destroyed half the country, happened anyway. And yet, even in death, Ranavaluna did not let her people go. To this day, her name is still spoken with trepidation in Madagascar. Parents scare their children with tales of a blood queen whose spirits can come for the disobedient. Offerings are left at her tomb, not as a sign of respect, but to propitiate her spirit. The priests say her soul is restless. Too much pain, too much blood. They say at night her silhouette can be seen among the shadows of the old palace, and her last words can sometimes be heard in the wind. They are coming for me, demons with chains of fire. Ranavaluna sought immortality through fear, and in this, bitterly, she succeeded. 2 centuries later, her name still makes hearts clench. Unlike conquerors who are remembered for glory or victory, she is remembered for destruction. Not just for the thousands she executed with her own hand, but for the millions who were never born because of her rule. Entire generations were wiped out. Ancestral lines were severed. Old rituals were redrawn. Fear of change took such deep roots that for years to come, it kept the country from moving forward. Ranavaluna didn't just turn a paradise island into a hell. She created a new hell, a hell that continues to live in the memory of the people. A monument of cruelty that still terrifies even the imagination. History rarely remembers rulers so vividly, but when it does, it is for greatness or horror. And in this dark gallery, Ranavaluna stands apart. A queen whose cruelty was so complete, so systematic, that it is beyond comprehension. And if one day on the shores of Madagascar you hear the wind moaning through the old trees, rest assured, it is the whispers of those she destroyed. Their voices echo through the ages.